to start off with is just what is team culture? How do you create it? What aspects make up team culture? The same could be for organizational culture. There are a lot of models that are out there. This particular one is by Edgar Schein, and it really is kind of built on a kind of an approach that says there are some underlying foundational elements. In this case, we're going to call them underlying assumptions. So habits, perceptions, beliefs, thoughts, feelings that are really kind of core to who individuals are. And then built on top of that are a set of values. Sometimes those are codified in things like policies and standards. And most organizations and teams have those, whether they're extremely explicit and predefined, or they evolve over time. And then the third piece is what we consider artifacts and practices. And this is oftentimes the stuff that you experience most, especially if you're co-located in the same physical space. So like space layout, dress codes, et cetera, are things that you just notice. You walk into an office and you experience that aspect of their culture. Are you greeted? Do people nod and say hello when they pass you in the hallways? For a remote team, some of those things could be virtual in nature. So emojis and GIFs are really easy examples, especially when you're using tools like Slack or other tools that Jevin will talk about today as well. They also could just be verbal. So stories, jokes. I often think about just our trips to, down the block to grab lunch at Jimmy John's or Chipotle's. And those are things that have, if we're thinking about those on a scale, one is from a visibility and awareness perspective, obviously the artifacts and practices, those things that you experience on a day-to-day basis that are very, very visible and very present on a more co-located team. High visibility and awareness for those things, but maybe low in terms of underlying assumptions. And then in terms of the ability to impact culture or the impact of changing an organizational culture or team culture, those things that are at the bottom, the habits, the perceptions, the thoughts and the feelings, those things are harder to change and it takes a longer time period. And so I think at least primarily the initial thrust of this presentation today is going to focus on relationships and the collaborative aspect of being a remote team. And oftentimes, if you're talking about artifacts and practices, those things that are visible in nature, that tends to be some of the hardest, most complicated things to create for remote teams. So we really want to focus on that in probably the first 2/3 of the presentation, and I'll come back towards the back half and give some other examples of some of those lower two items that can also have a huge impact on building team performance. So Devin, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Darren. So let's go through a couple of challenges. I like Darren in that I like Darren for a number of reasons, but I really like he's like a strategic thinker. He's thinking top down. I'm not as good at that. I'm very tactical. What is the problem? Let's go find some solutions for it. So if I'm having like relational issues in a company or with someone else, I'm just like trying to think like, what is the problem here? What's not working? And then trying to come up with some ways to kind of overcome that. So we just come at this from different angles and both pretty helpful. So here's the challenge. So how do you build trust with your manager remotely, right? You're not sitting next to them. You're not, they can't see if you're not watching YouTube or if you're not watching Maury Povich like all day long, which is someone who I spoke to. He said he watched Maury Povich for 3 weeks and just did like lightweight emails before he realized I actually need to figure this thing out. So put yourself in their shoes, right? Here are some things that they're probably asking about you. If you think there's issues with trust is, what are they doing today? Are they actually being productive if they're at a home or at a co-working space? Are they making me look good as a manager, right? Like ultimately they're responsible for you. So are you helping them look good for their management in front of their company? Are they playing video games all day? Are they less productive at home than they are at work? Very common, that pyramid that Darren talked about, that underlying assumption that people are more productive in the office than at home. And it just depends really on the person and the situation. So how do you work through this? Well, there's something called managing up, and managing up is you taking responsibility to help to empower your manager to be a better manager of you. And so this is you figuring out how you can do a better job of that, instead of just assuming that, you know, the manager knows everything and they're just going to do what they need to do, when in the reality we've all had managers that are terrible, and hopefully you have a good, really good manager. But even in the case of a good manager, you need to be able to manage up. So this is something taken from the Lighthouse blog, and Lighthouse is a tool to help manage one-on-ones. And so what they say there is have a call with them, saying you want to do a better job helping them manage you. And they're not going to outright say that they don't trust you, because you say, if you say, hey, do you trust me? Of course, they're not going to say, no, I really don't trust you. So here are some questions that we can use to draw them out, to find out the real situation about ways that you can help manage them. What information do you feel that you're missing that you need to know to do your job better? And again, you're going to have this presentation, so if you're taking notes, great, but you'll be able to see all of this after the fact as well. At what level is a problem important enough that I should raise it with you? What is the best way to do so? So this is not, again, these are not, it's very subtle ways to figure out what angles they're maybe not so comfortable with you. And sorry if my face is getting blown out. The sun just came up. I'm going to put, when it's Darren's turn, I'm going to put down the blind here. How would you like me to present things to you, and what for things that I want coaching on? So these are areas maybe they that, like the underlying thing here is maybe they know some areas that they want you to grow. And so you're kind of calling them out into these different areas. Pretty subtle, but very powerful. And here's a bonus one for remote teams. Is what kind of responsiveness do you expect? If maybe they expect you to respond within 5 minutes during working hours, maybe they're okay with you answering 5 hours later. You know, having that assumption clearly explicit could really help. And then you can come up with different ways to be able to manage this, to be able to make this effective in your company. You could be the hero that maybe introduces a really good project management tool that helps the company. Maybe you can do daily email reports or check-ins, checkouts, weekly one-on-ones to help prioritize things with them, stand-up meetings. Maybe there's other stuff. But here are some ways that you can kind of, depending on how they answer those questions, that you can kind of manage that. Okay, so that was pretty quick. Here's another very, very common one that I hear about a lot is being left out of meetings and decisions. Maybe some people are in the office and you're at home and you just don't hear things. So let's do another quick poll. Make sure you all are still awake. Let's see. So here's a poll. So do you feel you are missing out of meaningful amount of meetings and decisions because you are remote? Oh, it's looking pretty split. All right, the last few. Good. Here we go. So let's share those results. So it looks like people, at least here, what do you think, Darren? Maybe 50% probably are having a harder, are doing okay, right? They rarely or never miss out, and often or sometimes is like the other half. What do you think?
Actually, I feel somewhat surprised by that. I really would have thought that it would have been more weighted towards often and sometimes, but well done, guys.
Yeah, it really could depend on your particular situation. You know, when I was working in a hybrid team, most people were in the office. Only, you know, maybe 20 of us were working separately, like at home. And so they would all have conversations and we just wouldn't hear about them. That's remote. But maybe if everyone's remote, or maybe you're only partly remote, maybe that's going to help your situation. But yeah, post in the chat if you feel you've done a good job of that. Darren and I would love to learn from you.
Well done.
So usually it's not malicious in my experience. It's usually just being forgotten. Like if there's a meeting that happened and you just are missing out of information, and out of sight, out of mind is a common reason for this. So as I just said, you know, if everyone's remote, everyone's on this level playing field for communication where you have to draw in the right people because they're not sitting next to anyone. If everyone's in the office, it's easy. Everyone's okay, I need to turn this down. You guys aren't able to see me at all. There. Thanks, guys, for your patience there.
Thanks for the question too, Paige. We'll come back to that towards the end.
Okay, great. And you can ask questions. There's a Q&A tool if you see there in Zoom. You can ask it at any time, and we'll get to a Q&A at the end. And so if everyone's remote, level playing field, everyone's in the office, you just ask people next to you, everyone's already there. But if it's hybrid, some people remote, some people in the office, usually it's going to be a lot harder. And the reason is because scheduled meetings, people usually think who are the right people to show up there. What it usually is this cheesy stock image situation at the water cooler where people are have this little conversation, and it goes like this: "Hey, Bill. Hey, how's it going with project A, B, C, or XYZ? I saw that you're working on." And then Bill replies, "Hey, it's pretty good. I meant to ask you about ABC. What do you think about using Thing F?" And they're like, "Oh, that's a pretty good idea. Have a few minutes. Let's talk about it." And boom, all of a sudden you're having this meaningful meeting between these two people. But yet, Abby, maybe who's sitting at home, would be a really good person to involve in that, but they just didn't think to do it because it was ad hoc and Abby wasn't totally visible. And so maybe you feel you could have been a key person there, but you weren't, and that's really tough. So the ways that you can kind of manage this as an employee, maybe you're a manager as well, which is even better because you can have more influence over this. But I really like to do demo videos. If maybe you were the two people in the office and you had a conversation, maybe you could do a quick demo of your thoughts. Maybe if you're sitting at home, you can be better at initiating conversations and over-communicating more your thoughts. And then if you're doing it within a tool like on Slack or Microsoft Teams or in Asana, then people are seeing that you're more active and you're sharing your thoughts. And hopefully that would spur on more conversations with other people, like other people doing the same thing. So more of these conversations are happening in these tools where now you have the visibility into that. And so set the trend to loop other people into the conversations, also really powerful. Okay, here's some other thoughts. So you can get in person regularly. If I would fly down once a month just to go and have the really important meetings with the people in the office, because it was really challenging for some people to be able to talk through video. So that could be, helpful if you can get some budget to do that. Okay, here's a fun tool. So another way of being able to get more conversations online so that you are now privy to it is doing public recognition of others. There's this really fun tool that I like called Hey Taco, and you can add this to Slack or Microsoft Teams. And what this does is whenever someone has something that they think is pretty cool, you just tag the person in the tool and you just add like the taco emoji, and everyone's got 5 taco emojis they can give to someone else every day. And so you can like build up all of these tacos if you've been doing all these amazing things and people are recognizing you, but you also get rewards for recognizing others. So they have this like leaderboard tool. Anyways, it's pretty fun. And it's another great way to be able to try to help to do this over communication, which is really important for remote teams. All right, another one, challenge and solution, building strong work relationships. All right, here we go. So another poll, making you work. Let me get this started here. I'm talking way too much. I'm not interested. Darren is here. All right, here's launch a poll. So do you feel that someone's answering already? Do you feel your work relationships could be better if you worked in the office, as in like all in the same physical space? Or do you feel that, hey, it doesn't make any difference? I'm working remotely twice a week, or I'm working remotely fully. Doesn't make a difference. What are your thoughts on this, Darren? What's your preference while they're voting?
Yeah, I definitely love some FaceTime. And I think largely because there's just simple questions that come up and it's always easier to just kind of nudge somebody. But I know for some people, their personal work styles, that feels very disruptive. So being remote for some people, I think is better because it helps them control kind of the pace with which they work and their level of focus on that work as well.
And I think Darren's bringing up a good point. Like it's all dependent on the person, right? There's no one size fits all for how we work. In the same way, there shouldn't be maybe one size fits all for remote work. So here you go. Do you feel your work relationships could be better if you worked in the office? Maybe, sure, or yes, yeah. And I think that's fair. If we were all sitting together, I think we would have better relationships. And so, how do we build better relationships when we're not in that particular situation? Okay, cool. So how do we do it? So Darren, how about you take this slide?
Yeah. So let me jump in on this one. So one of the things that I think is hard for remote is, you're really relying on technology, and some of that could be things like Zoom that allow you to feel a little bit more face to face, see some of the facial expressions and maybe some of the hidden cues that you wouldn't normally get if you're just messaging through Slack or email. But even still, even with tools like Zoom, it's often hard to kind of catch some of those body language or non-linguistic cues. And the other thing that also I think kind of makes this challenging is that what we find regularly is for remote teams is you kind of fall into a habit of only communicating when there's a reason to communicate. So it actually starts to feel very transactional. Like the only times that I'm going to reach out to you or that you're going to reach out to me is when you need something. And it actually kind of gets in the way of actually building a meaningful relationship at work. I don't have the advantage if I'm working remote of that 5-minute walk to and from the restaurant where we're going to go grab lunch together. Even if we're just bringing it back and eating at our desk, that 5 or 10-minute conversation goes a long way towards helping me understand who you are, your values, some of the things that you like to do, your interests outside of work. And it just really kind of can be a barrier towards missing opportunities to build powerful bonds. So that's some of the challenges that I think we see regularly. One of the ways that we've heard a client kind of get past that is they'll use a tool like Slack or Teams, and if somebody's got a 20 or 30-minute drive to a client appointment, or maybe they're just going to pick their kids up from school towards the end of their day, they'll jump on Slack and they'll just toss something in and says like, hey, I'm available in my car for this 20-minute segment. If anybody's interested in connecting, here's my number, give me a call, right? And it's really kind of just giving people permission to kind of have a conversation that doesn't have to feel transactional. Yeah, there could still be some work-related things that get done in that conversation, but it's really meant to be more of a relationship-building opportunity that helps people really establish those bonds and kind of move their relationship beyond just the things that they're trying to get done that day.
I love that. And people actually take advantage of that. Like it's not written to a specific person. It was written just like generally. And they're like, yeah,
just broad. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. That's great. There's this interesting study that came out from Gallup, and this is not particular to remote, but just to companies in general, is those who have a best friend at work are 7 times as likely to be engaged in their jobs, they are better at working, and engaging customers. They produce higher quality work, and they have higher well-being and are less likely to get injured on the job. So just more research that suggests stronger relationships at work only help. So if you're a manager or if you're a founder of a company, you should really try to figure this out. And so ideally, as we all kind of discussed and saw in the poll, is yes, like if we're getting together in person, we will have better relationships. And Nancy has a great point herself, right? She says maybe people who are working remotely are more productive. Maybe being in person, you'll be able to get to know people in the office better. And I totally agree, right? You have these ad hoc conversations. You're walking to them to the office. It makes a lot of sense. So again, we're not all in the office. So how do we do it? I like tools. I like adding tools, especially if it automates my life. There's this great little tool that's easy to add called Donuts. And what you do is you add this to your Slack. Hopefully you guys are using Slack, Microsoft Teams. I know Darren is, because we're hearing all of his Slack notifications. But you add this little tool, and what it does.
I am at least muting now.
That's fine. If we're working remotely, this is our life. We all understand how this goes. But what Donut does is it'll try to match up people who normally would not connect in different channels to have a little coffee date together. And so whether you can do it virtually or not, it doesn't really matter. We started doing it virtually, and it was fantastic for our company. We would just meet people that we wouldn't normally meet. They have a story where I think IBM added it, and they had 2 different people who were working on basically the identical product in 2 totally separate areas in the organization. They did a joint presentation, and they were able to do some amazing stuff. But who knows about when you talk to other people in your company. And CEOs love it, of course, because they it really helps to develop relationships, and maybe those CEOs know the Gallup study. there's this other thing called Lean Coffee Table. And what Lean Coffee Table is just a really structured coffee time. So you can time bound it to half an hour. Everyone talks about the different, submits the different topics that they want to talk about. Then there's like a voting time where people can vote on which topics they want to talk about. They all get prioritized. And then you add a timer for each conversation. And then people can vote if they want to keep talking about it or not at the end of the conversation. So it's like a really lightweight way. If you do have a half an hour that people want to spend lunch together, they can all kind of talk about what all of them want, majority. So it's pretty easy. I run a Lean Coffee Table with a bunch of my friends, and we have a great time with it. There you go, Darren.
Yeah, so I figured this is a good opportunity too to talk about how Cloverleaf kind of helps remote teams. So not a huge sales pitch, but just a couple of quick examples. So one of the things that we do is we email people that are on a team together every Monday and Thursday morning. So this little view on the left-hand side might be an example of something you get. One thing about you and one thing about someone else on the team. So these are great insights to kind of help you discover who the person is kind of below the surface, like their natural work styles, tendencies, and then you can rate that content. That helps feed into the engine and you get more high value content over time. Another example is on our Slack integration. So we'll actually push coaching content out inside of a channel if you choose to have that pushed to a channel. And then you get an opportunity to, or it's a prompt for you to respond to so that you can actually identify those opportunities or those places where you've seen that play out in that other person's work life. And so not only is it a great way to provide recognition, like Jevin mentioned earlier, but it's also a great way to kind of continue to increase your relational knowledge about the people that you're working with on a daily basis.
I love that. And you can see Tim, he recognized it right away I guess, when he read the recommendation that he was able to like identify that this thing was happening. So it's a nice way to kind of reflect on the different personalities that you have in the company. Very cool.
Yeah, well, I'll continue on. I think just referring back to kind of that initial culture model that we talked about at the very beginning, most of the conversation that we focused on is really building relationships and kind of how do we communicate and how do we, make sure that relationally we've got a team that understands each other and, to the point of the Gallup study, is increasing our level of engagement as a team. But one of the things that we want to start to focus on a little bit, or at least provide some recognition to, are the things beyond kind of the relational elements. And just because you're remote doesn't mean that you have to check kind of other important aspects of building a high performing team at the door. And so one of the things that at least three elements that kind of extend beyond kind of relationships or the relational aspects of work is you still have to have a really clear understanding of your goals and expectations. So as a team, what are we trying to accomplish? What's in the next sprint? How are we thinking about our team and the goals of the team over the course of the next year? We're coming into a season of, end of year reflection, new year kind of plans and expectations. You're probably doing maybe even some team building activities. So it's a good opportunity to kind of reset. Hey, these are the goals, these are the expectations, and this is kind of how you as an individual, whether you're remote or not, kind of slots into that and can help actually drive the achievement of those goals. The other is just growth expectations. Just because an individual is remote doesn't mean that they don't have expectations for their own personal growth, right? So whether that's career advancement and career planning, or it could just be as small as, identifying some new skill sets or new experiences or opportunities that they may still want to take advantage of organizationally. And then the last thing is just overall individual strengths and how my individual strengths or how those of the other members of the team may come into play to increasing the overall performance. So what's the kind of work that I'm excited to get up and do in the morning? That doesn't change just because I'm remote. And really kind of matching the work to the strengths of the individual, still really important to increasing the levels of productivity and performance at a team level. All right. So 2 quick calls to action, and then I think we can maybe address some of the questions. And if anybody else has questions, feel free to throw those in there as well. So 2 quick offers or kind of next steps. The first is we are offering a 50% off of a team account of up to 15 people. And you can go to cloverleaf.me/teams. Feel free to use the code AwesomeRemote. I know it's a tough one. Awesome Remote. And you can do that through the end of the year. As I mentioned, we're kind of coming up on the end of the year. Reflection, thinking about, hey, how do we increase the performance of the team going into 2020? This could be a great way to kind of get that started off on the right foot. And then I think Jevin has something that he wanted to mention as well.
Yeah, right on. So if you're a manager managing a remote team or just manager in general, I've got this little kind of quiz that you can do that compares yourself to others. So buildingremoteteams.com/quiz. And the nice thing there is, I think it's like 18 questions. You go through it, and depending on your answer, you get an emailed report giving you some ideas. I'm like, here's where you're doing awesome. Here's some things that you can improve, but like, here's some really concrete things that you can go and do to start doing these things better. So you get a plan of action right away. So by just finishing that, and it takes maybe like 3 minutes. It's pretty easy. It's just yes or no. So I'd love for you to check that out.
All right, awesome. So with that in mind, I wrote down a couple of the questions that came through. One was multi-site manager, how to not micromanage the other people on the team, but also still staying kind of in the communications loop. So Jevin, do you want to start with that one?
Sorry, I wasn't even listening. I was playing with how to do this Q&A thing. Sorry, right, and I'll just say quickly, guys, like, we do have quite a bit of time. So if you have questions, pull up the Q&A tool in your Slack, in the Slack bar, and you can just post your questions there, and Darren and I will get to them. We've already got some. So sorry, go again.
Yeah, no, I'll go back to it again, and then I'll throw a quick example or anecdote out as well. So the question was, hey, and it looks like Paige, a manager, multi-sites, where team members are considered remote. How can I not micromanage but still stay in the communications loop? So one of the ways that we've done this as a team is we have a channel just called Daily Stand Up in Slack. You can do the same thing in Teams. And really the point there is really to kind of drive some accountability. And so the expectation is that every day we're posting just, hey, what are the things that we're working on? Where do we have some potential roadblocks? And then, what are kind of the next things coming up on the timeline? And so we just set that expectation very early on. And as new members come in, that expectation is there as well. It's a great way to stay in the communications loop, but still drive some accountability. So it doesn't have to feel like you're micromanaging. And so I think one of the biggest things from my perspective is just making sure that you have some of those really clear kind of procedures or communication approaches that give you that opportunity to stay in the communication loop without having to feel like, if you're constantly pinging them regularly, then that's going to feel like micromanagement, maybe to you or to the individual you're asking the question of, versus if you just have some set standards in terms of, hey, what are the expectations around when people are supposed to communicate and at what level?
Yeah, I love that. If I was in this situation, I was like, just wondering like, I wonder what that employee's working on, or like, I wonder that team, I'm not entirely sure what they're doing. What I would do is just have do a little bit of soul searching page on like, what exactly, at what level do I actually want to be involved, or do I want to see, So if you're okay with them doing the daily collaboration on certain things, like great, but maybe when they're making decisions, maybe you want to be able to see those decisions, or you want to be able to be involved with those decisions. I think you have to figure out, what level of comfort you have at this stage, right? Maybe later on that they will become, that you can give them more responsibility because you trust them more, or for whatever reason, they're more competent. So that's number one. And the second would be, just like what Darren said, is kind of setting those expectations, and maybe even putting a tool around it where it's like, hey, guys and girls, we are sitting, we have standardized on this project management tool. And I'd really prefer if you put all of your tasks in there. And as you discuss these tasks, just leave the comments on it. I'm not going to be in there every day, but maybe I'm going to be wondering about it. And so I want to be able to go through and be able to read those or be able to participate. not as micromanaging way, but just because I want to know what's going on or because I care about it for
Yeah.
a particular reason.
One other thing I'll add to that too is, that to some degree that can be a personal style question as well. Because like what we find is even if an individual team member is not remote, we have different styles or approaches to how we want to be managed, and the types of questions that we like to get asked. So an example inside of our team, we're mostly what we would consider support motivated team members, which means, hey, if I walk up and ask someone, hey, how's that particular task going? It doesn't feel like micromanagement because we want to know that the manager is engaged with us and they're asking us those questions and looking for opportunities to break down those barriers. But I have one member of the team who's in a sales role who doesn't prefer a support motivated approach, and he's very goal oriented. And so he just wants to know, what's the number I need to achieve today, or this week, or this month, and then talk to me at the end of the month, at the end of the day, or the week, or the month, and I will let you know, what that number is. And because if I'm asking him regularly along the way, it's going to feel like micromanagement to him versus the rest of the team. They're not going to feel like it's micromanagement. So that difference in style can play out regardless whether we're remote or, all co-located in the same spot. And one of the ways to kind of avoid that is just to understand truly, what style do they prefer? And I think kind of setting that expectation up front about, hey, I'm gonna want to know what you're doing and your level of productivity. How can we have that conversation in a way that feels productive, but doesn't feel like micromanagement to you?
I really like that. Okay, I think we have a tool. We have the ability to actually allow those people asking questions to participate and get their video on here. So if you want, Michael, okay, James, you're coming next. If anyone else have questions, we still got time, so feel free to. But yeah, Michael, if you want, you can ask your question. We can talk about it. Go for it.
Well, I put it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question, I don't know exactly how I worded it, but basically,
sure.
I understand the importance and necessity of remote workforces, and technology keeps us connected, and I put that in quotes.
Right.
However, I think it takes away from those true, real, intimate relationships that you form, in just the general work that or not the work, but the conversations and interactions that happen in a traditional setting. I'm remote. I work with a network of offices, and I often feel like I'm isolated. And I know that there's tools to connect us, but we get so wrapped up in our day-to-day process and activity and trying to drive business that you forget to be intentional about that connection. And so I know it's up to me and my colleagues to be more thoughtful about it, but I'm kind of fearful of just this overall belief that remote is real and necessary, when in reality I think there's a necessity to have real offices too, right? Does that make any sense?
For me, it definitely does. I'm pretty extroverted. I'm like a software engineer who's pretty extroverted. So I have this issue where like I feel if I don't leave the house, I've only left the house twice in the past 2 days, and so like I can feel really weird by Wednesday, and I need that personal connection. And my wife was super frustrated when I'd come home and like I'd be all over her, just like, hey, like how's it going with Bob and Larry? What's the dynamic at work like now? Like she's like, what the heck? You need a social life of your own. So I have a co-working space that I go to twice a week just to be able to have other people to be around and foster some other relationships with. So for me, that's worked. And I hope, and yeah, anyone who's done this remote thing for any amount of time realize that, no, you actually have to work with those relationships. Darren, what do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I mean, and that's what immediately came to my mind was co-working. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why co-working has exploded in popularity, not just because, there are big companies like WeWork that, create a really awesome place to go work, but also just because there are people who still crave that human connection, right? And it doesn't always just have to be your coworkers, right? The people that are actually on your team. And you can find a community, and sometimes that's even more beneficial and more powerful for the team, because you're bringing in relationships and ideas and opportunities that are outside of your organization and outside of your team that a lot of organizations would never have the ability to tap into if they were all co-located in the same spot, right? We only know the things that we're hearing from our coworkers in the same physical location, versus being able to tap into this broader network. So that's definitely one piece of it. I mean, I think the other thing too, Michael, is, as it relates to connecting with your team members, I put one-on-one appointments on my calendar for every week. They're just recurring appointments. We typically meet those. And I think the same thing could apply, just even if it's a 10, 15 minute, placeholder on your calendar every week that you can stay kind of accountable to. The same thing would apply even if we weren't co-located in the same spot. Just a nice reminder, like, hey, give them a call, see what's happening. And, maybe there's not anything going on that you can help them with from a work standpoint, but, at the very least, it's an opportunity to kind of connect and, hear their voice on the other end.
That's great. Michael, thank you for that question. James, global hybrid teams, what's on your mind?
Oh, Jevin, hey, thanks for putting this on. I appreciate the opportunity to listen and learn a little bit. My question really is, as you think about a global hybrid team, and you certainly have some people that are interested in developing and being high performers and advancing their career and have ambition in that direction. Do you have some things you've done in the past to support or highlight visibility for those people and put them in front of different leadership opportunities or things that you've seen that have worked? I'd love to hear what you have to say.
So global hybrid team, can you just define what that means? The whole nomenclature related to this stuff, remote, distributed.
Yeah, so I just made it up. I was trying to play along. The truth is,
great.
I work in the United States at a kind of a global business center. We have 5 people here in the U.S. that sit with me, and then I have 2 people out in Turkey and then 1 in Russia. And it really is, I believe we have some very talented people that sit away from this particular site, and they're not managed by a leadership team that sits in the UK and then a separate one that sits in Sweden. They report into me, and I guess that's kind of the dynamic I'm working with.
Yeah, well,
and so you have some people that are maybe trying to being better performers or want to be better performers and trying to give them opportunities. Is that right?
Yeah,
Great, Darren, what do you think?
Yeah, well, one of the things that there's this concept of virtual distance, right? So, I mean, distance doesn't have to just be physical distance, but, there's also cultural distance. And I think that adds an extra layer to remote teams, just because, different cultural backgrounds, you may make assumptions about someone in a different culture, and maybe they're either their interest in advancement and promotion opportunities, or their interest in other projects and development in a way that maybe is more U.S. centric. And one of the things I always think is just really good is kind of a set of questions to just make sure that you understand what their expectations are, and reconnecting on that. So what types of work are they looking for? What's their career path, their ideal career path look like in 2 years? Especially understanding the idea that, hey, I might be the only person in the Russian, territory for my organization. So it's not like there's, a local office, even if it's outside of my department or my division, that could be an opportunity to advance my career. Where are there remote opportunities that exist across your organization? Because I mean, that just is going to be a natural potential barrier for that person. If you're one of the only places in the organization that has an actual remote opportunity, then, the reality is their opportunities are going to be capped or limited by the fact that, organizationally, there's just not broader support for remote work. And so that definitely has to be a part of the conversation. But I also would say don't just project your like US based assumptions on what their career, expectations or hopes are. Yeah, was that helpful at all?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to frame it. You answered a second question I had, which is around getting through cultural differences. I suppose I can say pretty clearly that I have at least two people that I know want to find advancement because, like, through conversations and exploring that, that's like their stated ambition. But you're absolutely right. Trying to step backwards through some of the cultural differences between, the near Middle East and certainly into Russia's. For me, it's a different world. So yeah, you definitely stepped into that, and I'm still not 100% clear how to formulate my questions around it.
Yeah, do you have a sense for what the level of support is for remote in your organization?
Oh man, it's certainly something that is required in different places. I suppose it is generally viewed. We work through an operations organization, so operations generally has a tendency to say like on-site, in person every time,
Right.
with very little exception. So there's opportunity, and certain people might receive benefit or privilege, if they're high achievers, right? But in generalities, the operations organization is less than keen on supporting that.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, some roles lend themselves more effectively towards remote work, right? Like software
Absolutely.
development has just been a really easy place for, I think, remote work to exist and flourish. But and I would also say like sales and business development typically is a place as well where you can be remote and still be wildly effective. But one thing that you could do is just also kind of advocate on, if in your organization there's not broad support beyond maybe a couple of key functional roles, how can you access or maybe even initiate some broader initiative, and maybe HR is a great place to start with that, to kind of say like, hey, I've got this largely remote team. How can I create opportunities for these people? Given the fact that they're in these limited functional roles that may not necessarily have broad advancement opportunities on a remote basis, how can we think about engaging them in ways in career development that, can keep them engaged and keep them excited about their long-term and future prospects, and still allow them to be in a remote capacity?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Hard. Yeah. Did that answer your other question? Yeah. So both your questions sounds like we
Yeah, I'd say you got it pretty well. Thank you.
Thanks, James. So Paige had a question earlier where she wanted to talk about. Oh no, we did answer that with the micromanagement. Pardon me. All right, Nancy. Let's see if we can get you on here. That's okay. And are you still here, Nancy? I think Nancy's gone. I don't see her in the attendees list now. Yep.
Yeah, one of the things, I'm going to go back to Paige, because I mean, I think we did ask one of her questions earlier, I think, about multi-site and micromanaging, but also staying in communications loop. I think she offered up kind of a second point to that question, specifically now that, so they were a part of an organization that had kind of been left on their own and have been kind of consolidated or reorged to be under a more corporate structure. Requires more information, more communications across multiple sites, it's a larger team. And these team members might be, a little bit resistant, right? Because culturally things have changed inside the organization. And I do think, I think one real barrier, like, Jevin and I have talked about a lot of tools here, like Donut and Slack and others. I know some of the bigger corporations, right, if they may be resistant to using some of those technologies, maybe information security restrictions or policies that kind of prevent you from being able to tap in or utilize some of those tools. But tools are really helpful, I think, in terms of engaging people that maybe had a little bit more of a hands-off process and are coming into a structure that requires more communication, more touch points. Ultimately, you don't want to kind of force force tools on people. You want it to be something that's engaging and that they're like excited to use. But oftentimes it's a way that you can initiate those communications or encourage those communications in a way that doesn't feel like it's just, hey, the big corporate entities coming in and requiring you to do fill out the TPS reports, quote unquote. So Jevin, I don't know if you have something to add to that. I mean, clearly that cultural change extends beyond just the remote component, but.
Yeah, I mean, all I was going to say is I understand how challenging it is when, if we look at that pyramid that Darren shared and the underlying assumptions of like how a company should be run or an effective company run was before, where maybe remote was very well accepted, and this is how we are as a company, and this is very productive, and all of a sudden now we're in this larger corporate entity, which the whole underlying assumptions have changed about what does it mean for our company, and maybe remote is no longer part of those values or those underlying assumptions that they really care about. It's a real uphill battle, and so it's not easy. I can totally understand, but I think maybe that's just what you need to hear, right? It's like, this is not like your fault in particular, Paige, but it's just really, really hard when the whole underlying foundation is being changed on you.
Yeah, and you could potentially turn that to your advantage as a leader for that team, right? It's like, hey, or culturally, like, rules of engagement have changed a little bit. So how can we work together to find the right approach to still, to feed the larger corporate or corporate needs for communication, but in a way that feels like they're a part of that solution, right? Like, hey, I'm in this with you. We're trying to figure out how do we approach this and satisfy the needs of those in this larger leadership role. So that could be one way to approach that and find some effective ways to do that. Margie also messaged in as well, back to the global hybrid team discussion. She made a really great point. I don't know if Margie wants to join, and Jevin, if you can do that, or if not, I'm happy to just read what she said, a shared channel in Slack or Microsoft Teams to talk about cultural differences.
Do you feel comfortable sharing that, Margie? Hi. Is it Margie or Margie?
Margie, yes.
Margie, hi.
Hi. So I'm always thinking about the cultural side, especially on a global level, because this is so relevant to a lot of the global teams and the kind of distance teams that are going on. When I think of HR, I know that a lot of HR firms here in the city are so spreading into other areas where maybe like the coffee talk or like having those opportunities for getting together to meet up is not necessarily possible because you're in other countries and different time zones and everything like that. But it's as much a way of discussing differences that you see in the workplace as much as it is an opportunity to help team members from different areas to connect, to learn about each other by talking about cultural differences, right? And it works really well because we do make such, so many assumptions about how others work and how they live and everything, that it can be as powerful for creating really meaningful relationships at a distance, but also, to kind of start also, bringing up, I think, the bigger picture of let's not make assumptions about what we think is going on because there are so many differences. And so it feeds off of each other really to have that stronger relational connection that allows you to also talk about the cultural differences from an organizational, standpoint and performance standpoint to really get at, maybe some things that we're making assumptions about. So I think that those are ways, of doing that. Like I said, when, there might be other constraints in terms of logistics and geographical, constraints. So.
Yeah, I mean, some of what I heard you say too, Margie, at least in the text message that you sent, or the message you sent during the Q&A, is almost creating an opportunity for people to celebrate those differences as well, right? So not just that, like, hey, maybe the way I think about career development in the U.S. is different than career development in Russia, but more so just celebrating these things that impact the way I work that might be a cultural component, and really creating an opportunity for people to share those and celebrate it, as opposed to, judge that as though it's something less than or different in a bad way.
Absolutely, and it really brings off the other side of it, which is, we humans are complex, and when you put in those cultural elements too, a person's values within an organization, even though they may be shared values to a certain extent, there are also values that might connect to larger cultural components that they can also bring into that relationship, and that, the trust with the managers and a lot of the other things. And there's also areas that you can understand might hinder some of those challenges, or some of the successes in those challenges that you have, by understanding how does this operate in a different culture, in a different country. And so it's a good opportunity to talk about a variety of different things that are relevant to, again, that human connection, but also to the organizational culture.
That's awesome.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margie. All right, we've got one more question coming up. We're going to pull in Greg. Greg, what do you think, bud?
Hey guys, thanks for having me and for
Hey,
putting
Greg.
on the webinar here. We've talked a lot about what we see as the challenges today, but I'm just wondering is like what you're envisioning for the future as this becomes more prevalent and a lot more people are involved in it. What kind of challenges will that create, and what do you see as the future of remote work and making sure people are productive and happy and developing and moving in their careers?
I think loneliness is going to be a huge factor. We've already touched on it a little bit, even through some of the panelists that you guys have come and shared with. I heard this story once where even in small towns, Amazon has changed the entire social landscape of a small town. And I was really surprised by how this happened. But what happened was packages and mail used to be sent to the post office, and everyone would go to the post office, pick up their mail, and have these ad hoc interactions with their neighbors in their small town. Well, Amazon does delivery directly to your house. And so you don't even have to go to the post office anymore to get all your packages. And so so with everything happening more and more at home, where you don't even have to leave your house for groceries, for packages, for work, we're going to become more and more lonely. And so coming up with new strategies on how we can connect with each other to have meaningful relationships virtually, or, making these things like co-working, which is like making this space where people don't even work together. They just want to be around each other. That's going to be the major challenge that I see. Darren, what about you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see oftentimes, I think especially for more traditional businesses that are offering more remote options, is kind of the shift to a more asynchronous style of work, right? So like even Jevin and I, in putting this slide deck together, Jevin's used to 100% remote, 10 years of doing remote work. Like everything that he does is very real time. I'll record the session, I'll send it back. It was stuff I hadn't even thought about, right? And I think for more traditional businesses, changing the way that they work, where maybe if we were all co-located in the same space, it's easy for me to just do something, send it off, and move on to the next thing. And I think the types of work and how we actually do the work, I think is going to change dramatically as more and more people are doing more full-time remote work. And that's part of the reason why you've seen the explosion in tools, not just in terms of tools to help you build better relationships, but also tools to help you work better, more asynchronously. And I think the cool thing is, like, once you start kind of down that path, it's exciting how much additional productivity you can achieve when you do that. But at the same time, I think especially for generations that have spent 2 decades or 3 decades doing work in a traditional way, forcing them to kind of, or not forcing them, but like being forced to kind of update the way we work in terms of increasing productivity in that environment, I think is really a big challenge.
Amazing. Thanks a lot for the question, Greg. So I think that pretty well wraps it up for today. Apart from just kind of closing housekeeping stuff. Any last thoughts from you, Darren?
No, I really appreciate the level of engagement that everybody had today. Again, we'll make sure that we send the link out, but really excited, and feel free to shoot us a message if you feel like this was good content, if there were things that you would like us to have covered in the future. I think we're thinking about this as maybe the first in a series, or is there some opportunities that we can partner together to create even more resources or things to support people who are doing more remote work or are thinking about creating more remote work opportunities for their workforces.
Amazing. Yep. I'm very open. You're welcome to send me an email anytime, and happy to schedule a call, give you some free thoughts if you're stuck remote as an employee or a manager. Like I said, I do this consulting full time, and so I could talk about it all day long. Great. Well, thanks everyone. From Darren and I, you'll get this recording, send it to your friends, by Cloverleaf, and that's it for today. Thanks everyone for being so engaged.
See ya.
Cheers. Bye-bye.